Hello, everybody, and welcome to our ROTORS Bitesize with Bert Kammerer. Tonight, we're going to talk to you about all things servos and how the whys and wheres and hows of everything to do with them. Bert's got an awful lot of experience with servos. He designed and distributes his own called BKs, and hopefully, he knows a few bits and pieces about them as well. So,
We'll try.
hi, Bert. How you doing?
Good. How are you, Adrian? Good to see you.
I'm good. I'm pretty good. Yeah, it's good to see you too. I hear you've been very, very busy out there.
Yeah, traveling quite a bit. I was actually up in England for a weekend a couple of weeks ago, but I've been mostly in Europe for the last 3 weeks, doing a lot of testing and attending some events and stuff like that. So
Yeah, you've been spending quite a lot of time over this side of the pond, haven't you? We're going to have to get you a passport, I think, at some point fairly soon. 'Cause-
pretty much, actually, I think I need a place somewhere up there, like a flat. That would be
are you over for Venlo next week?
nice. Absolutely. I'm leaving on Wednesday, so I plan on being in Netherlands on Thursday. So
Cool, awesome, right. So should we get to it then? Uh,
absolutely.
let's start with a basic one. I mean, servos. Just run us through what the sort of different servos you can get, right from the bog standard cheapies up to the high end, and the differences. Start at the bottom and work your way up with the differences between them.
I mean, there's so many different options out there. I think we should focus on the two most important options. I mean, of course, you have analog and you have digital. I don't think there's any analog servos out there anymore. Of course, you always signal. The encoding is much more efficient. The data is more accurate, and you get a better step throughout. I mean, there's so many different benefits, but let's just focus, I guess, more on the two main options we have. I think they're brush and brushless. I think that's really what people talk about all the time. Which one's better? Which one's worse? I honestly think it's in the eye of the beholder. I think both have. I think the coreless has its positive things about it. The brushless has its positive things about it. Now, coreless versus just standard brushless. I don't think you can find coreless versus standard brushed servo. What's the difference between a brushed motor and a coreless brushed? I don't think you can buy a brushed servo anymore. I think you could back in the day. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm
I
not.
believe all the standard, like the S148s and all that sort of stuff, they're all standard brushed. So mechanically, what's the difference between a standard brushed motor
Well, I
and
mean,
a coreless motor? What makes it coreless?
think about a brush motor that has basically a three-pole wire, and the wire is wound around the servo motor using some kind of steel core with the wires, and they're all just basically wrapped around. When you weight to move around this motor, when everything's completely different because the heavy steel core is basically eliminated. Now we use just a wire mesh that just spins around the outside of the magnets. So the design is just basically lighter. It's more efficient. The starts, everything happens, I guess, to be redundant, more efficiently. You don't have all this weight to move around every time you start and stop. So for sure, coreless design within the brushed servo world is a much more efficient design, and it's what every manufacturer is going to these days. Now going back to brushed versus brushless. Pros and cons. And this is up for debate. I'm sure some people would disagree with me, like other people will agree with me. And this is seat of the pants experience, because when you look at the specs for a servo, and you're looking for, and we can talk about specs later, but you're looking for speed, you're looking for torque, you're looking for deadband, centering type of stuff. Obviously, you're looking at the overall design, whether it is digital, whether it can handle high voltage. I mean, so many different factors. But most people look at speed and torque. Those are the two things people look into when they're buying a servo. When you look at a brush servo versus a brushless servo with the exact same specs and the same speed, for example, theoretically,
You're dropping out a bit there, but I think your internet started playing up again. But carry on. Yeah, just I'll stop you if you pause for too long. I'll stop you and get you to repeat the sentence.
Sure. So basically, when you look at the specs of a brush servo and a brushless servo together, if they're both, for example, 0.10 millisecond speed, you think that both of them should behave exactly the same in terms of speed. And I can't scientifically explain why, but in practice, when I go fly, every time I fly a coreless servo with the exact same specs of a brushless servo, I always feel a slightly better, more instant or more reactive response off center on the stick. And there's ways to explain this from a scientific, I guess, a technical point of view, and it has, again, to do with the way the coreless motor works. The wire mesh is very light. It has the ability to start much quicker than a brushless motor, so you get a little bit quicker, more instant response. So to me, and again, this is up for debate. Some people might disagree with me on this one. But to me, the coreless, the brushed coreless servo feels more reactive on a 3D flight. Again, this is subjective because it depends on your flying style. If you're flying speed, or you're flying F3C, or you're flying sport flying, you might not notice anything. But again, and this is something that I feel constantly, every time I compare the two types of servos, I get a better response out of the coreless. Now, that comes at an extra price, and the price is, number one, you have more current utilization. I mean, you're going to use more electricity, more current, for sure, on a coreless servo than you will on a brushless. And it also comes at the expense of a shorter lifespan. However, with that being said, I don't have enough time with BK servos to tell you exactly how many maximum flights we can get out of them. But one of my favorite servos of all times was the JR 8717HV. I think it's got a different model number in the European or Asian markets. But this servo is a coreless servo. A lot of people think, oh, it's brushless. No, it's a coreless servo. It's super fast. It has unbelievable torque. It's durable. And I actually have some of these servos that have upwards of 2,000 flights in them. So durability in terms of, or life expectancy or longevity is very relative. I mean, how many times are you going to fly a servo before you upgrade or before you dispose of it, But
yeah, I think the longevity of servos is so subjective because especially for coreless, because if you're going to be if you're winding it on the end stop all the time, so it's so like a tail servo that's been incorrectly set up, so it can bind, then you're going to you're going to kill the brushes off very, very quickly. Whereas if you've got a servo that's been well looked after and never been crashed, I mean, I had a 925 the old Futaba 601 servo, that I'd had it for about 4 years, and it had a lot of flights on it, a lot. Yeah. I don't think the longevity of the brushes is a big issue.
Yeah, that's for sure. Again, theoretically, when you look at the actual specs, the numbers, what makes sense, of course, you're going to get a longer lifetime out of a brushless motor than you will out of a brush motor. But again, I mean, how does that translate into our day-to-day use on the servos? It's really not yet been proven to be favoring the brushless application. Now, in terms of pros and cons of brushless, well, the cons for me, and again, this is just me, is, again, I don't get that crisp, quick. It's not crisp. It's that quick reaction time off center. But the pros is, they're usually a little bit smoother running, and also they use a lot less current. So for sure, I mean, I think it's good to have both. The brushless also come at the expense of paying more money for the servo itself. Brushless motors are always going to be more expensive than coreless servos. So
yeah, definitely. I think there's some theoretical argument that the brushless servos can have a better hold torque before they start to offset on load. But I think for what we're using them for, I don't think that's too much of an issue. I mean, maybe on a big plane with massive control surfaces where hold torque is more important than acceleration and deceleration. The servos are moving around a lot more on a helicopter than they are on something on a plane, for instance. So I think you're right. I do quite like your thoughts on the cordless stuff is quite good, especially when it comes to price as well. Because I mean, these things aren't cheap, are they?
Absolutely. I think prices. We can talk about that here in a minute, but that has a lot to do with. I personally chose to release brush first or cordless.
So next, let's move on to sort of the specs side of things, like torque and speed, which are the two ones that everybody quotes. And we'll talk about the sort of the deadband and century stuff in a second. Let's talk about the ones that you can actually compare between the servos. I mean, if you've got a helicopter of X amount of size, is there what's the advantage of having hideous amounts of torque versus really, really fast, or is there a minimum amount of torque that's required, or what's when you're specing a servo for a model or specing a model for a certain servo, what's your sort of requirement for those servos?
Practically with every servo that's out on the market, servo, almost every, I think there's a couple of different models out there that are not. Practically almost every single full servo that is on a 700 class machine, and by this I have approximately in ounces. I would say 100 ounces would be what I would be happy with, or higher.
Say that again. You just broke up for a fraction. Just on the exact torque figure.
As far as torque, the minimum that I would be happy with, 150 ounces, or 100 class machine. Now, most of the servos out there have ounces of torque. So torque is because you want to make sure you have enough torque to be able to aim or to drive the swash blade in any flight condition. A lot of people think that you need more torque when you do 3D. This is true. You need more torque. The torque is actually needed flight, very high speed, big loops, for example, require a lot of torque. Doing this stuff on the deck and this 3D and this flips and these, torque is not so important. Speed is more important in this case. So, of course, speed and body. So you must find something that suits what you're looking for. If you're a guy that's doing or F3C flying or speed flying, you want something that has plenty of torque, twice speed a little bit, because you really don't need much speed for this type of application. You're an all-around 3D guy that just wants to do a 3D routine, or possibly need speed, and you just have to find a good compromise where you get the good speed.
Yeah, we keep losing you a little bit there, but it's quite regular. I think it's just cleaned up again though. So say that last sentence again.
Where were you at? If you're the kind of person that is doing more flying, big sky, and say speed flying, you want obviously the amount of torque you can get.
Yeah.
Or if you sacrifice some of the speed. But if you're the guy that wants to do just 3D, I would look more into a servo that has fast speed, the fastest you can get, and then sacrifice a little bit of torque. Of course, you still need enough torque, but again, most servos at least 150 ounces of torque, which is generally enough.
Right, just conscious of the time. We're gonna so speed is good for if you're bouncing around on the deck. Torque is, you need a minimum amount of torque. What about the sort of the mid-rangey, cheapy servos? I mean, what do you lose from those that you gain from the high end stuff?
You mean the type of servo you're referring to?
Well, just the kind of just barely does the job. Why would somebody spend 2 or 3 times the amount of money on who's not doing 3D, who's not sort of bashing it around all over the place? Your average sports flyer who's doing loops and rolls. What is an expensive servo going to do them more justice than a cheaper one?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. what I always tell people to do is follow your instinct and buy something that you believe will be well represented. To me, that's the most important thing. When I buy electronics, and you're an electronics guy,
Yeah.
you know, you probably will because it's a piece of. When you buy a servo, it doesn't matter what servo, buying something from a reputable outlet that you know is going to take care of your problem if you ever had a problem. And as long as you're covered, then I don't think there's anything wrong. I said is basically true. There's many people out there that high-end servo. Don't buy the high-end servo. If you find a servo that you like, and I'm not mentioning brands, but any servo that you like that's less expensive, that meets the specs that you want, go for it. If you have a trust in that company, there's absolutely no need to go and spend twice as much for specs.
I will just disagree with you slightly on that one. There is a definite limit to where you can take that to, because some of the cheaper servos are cheap for a reason. So they're, like we were talking about earlier on with the centering and how the servo, although the specifications, i.e. how much torque and speed it's got, are the same. And that's what I was trying to lead into. The deadband and the centering side of things won't be necessarily be as good. You do get what you pay for.
Totally agree with you, but again, I wasn't mentioning brands. There are certain brands and certain servos that you definitely don't want to go into. And I wish I could just talk about it. I just don't want to start naming names. But of course, I do agree with you. Too cheap is not. If it's too cheap, there's a reason for it.
Yeah.
Always check the spec. Use the servos to make sure they're happy. They had a good experience with them for sure. Absolutely.
Cool. Right. I'm just going to take a couple of these questions because there's a couple of them that are quite prominent. But this is from Gladstone. I think that's how you pronounce it. But I see you use a BEC in all of your helis. Do you like it better than a straight 2S LiPo?
The answer to that is I used to use a BEC. Yeah, but to answer the question, yes, I prefer a BEC over a 2S LiPo. And so far, the only BEC that I trust has been Western from Super Hercules Robotics. I've owned. I shouldn't say this, but I've never heard of anybody having an issue with them. I mean, they're the best BEC because it's so much more convenient than having to keep charging batteries separately for sure. But I don't. To answer the question, I don't use BECs now in this. Using Contronic Cosmic speed controllers, and I'm using a BEC, but it's the BEC that's built into the Cosmic. It's also highly reliable. So
I see. So you're running a BEC off the main LiPo, main power LiPo, to give you the to give you the same, to give you equivalent of a 2S voltage.
Exactly.
Okay.
Actually, cool. the BEC that speed controller runs 8 volts exactly. So it's a little bit below LiPo, but it's a consistent 8 volts.
Yeah. Do you run a backup on that as well, or just straight BEC?
I should, but I don't.
I learned that lesson recently.
Don't tell me about it. I've had an issue or two in the past where battery has some, but I just like to keep my setups as minimalistic as possible. I don't like to add too many things.
No.
But I recommend it. Use it. Use some kind of backup. The OptiPower one is awesome. The Scorpio backup guard is awesome. Either one of those.
Yeah, and leading on from that, I did a little backup video, a video about backups, which we released on Wednesday evening, which is worth having a look at if you haven't seen it yet. Right, right. Let's talk about the BKs then. As we've discovered what makes a good servo. So let's run us through how BK happened and where we are today, really.
Well, to make the long story very, very short, as short as I can, it all started because I was working for SAB, like I still do, and I was helping develop the Goblin 500, and the Goblin 500, as you know, uses mid-size servos, And I went and started searching for servos, and I just couldn't find anything that had good speed, good torque. Nothing. Everything was either too slow, not enough torque. I just wasn't happy with it. So somebody pointed me in the direction of RJX and said, well, RJX makes a really fast, really powerful mid-size servo. So I tried to find out who the factory that was making RJX was, and I got a hold of them, and I asked them to make a few changes, things in the deadband that I wasn't too happy with, or just a few things I wanted changed. And the guys just basically, why don't we make a servo and call it BK or something? I mean, it was really totally an unplanned sort of thing, but that's how it came about. And so I basically took the manufacturer that was making the RJX servos and had them make a case change, gear change, and a slight change to the chip. Band wasn't quite optimized the way I wanted it. It's a bit too high. And that's how the mini BK servo was born.
What, like you mean?
Yeah, you can see there, basically has a full-size coreless motor, so it gives you that, you know, the full-size power basically in a mid-size package. You know, in the beginning I had a little issue with the bolts breaking when people try to take the case apart. In fact, I've watches the show, purchased those servos. We replaced them free of charge, no questions asked for the new model. So I made this new case, changed the bolts, changed the gears. The gears are a stronger alloy now, so I'm happy with this servo. This was kind of an unplanned sort of product launch. But soon after I launched this, many people started asking me, well, when are you going to release the full size? I wasn't planning on doing any full-size servo, but I got back to the manufacturer, and we kind of plan on a new design, and really size was to make a servo that was a good price, because I remember having to pay for stuff back in the day, and those JR servos that I talked about, I paid $200 a servo. You know, they're very expensive, and I'm looking at other brands and they're going for 150, 140, 160, 180. So I wanted to do something that was under $100. Of course, I know for the UK market things are different with VAT and but I wanted to base it around $100, and that's what we got. We had to sacrifice a couple of little things, nothing major, but mostly having to do with, instead of using steel gears, we're still using aluminum. It's a strong aluminum, but it's aluminum. It's a little bit less expensive to make. There's a few little compromises like my part in terms of my bottom line. I mean, really, my margins are lower because I really wanted to push the servo out there and make it a full so. Of course, brushless was out of the question around this philosophy of releasing a servo with specs, good customer support, standing behind it, and a good price.
Yeah, and of course you do the tail servo as well, which is pretty neat little idea. We're having the same case with different top cases depending on what size you wanted. That's quite nice. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, you can use this servo on a 700 class machine, on a 500 top, and you use it on a small machine like a TRX 500 or a Goblin. Actually, Goblin 500 uses the full size top, but you change the top and use it on a machine that requires a mid-size servo. So it's an addition to the line. So I'm really happy with these. They're working really well, and the specs are really good too. So.
Yeah. And of course, you don't have that whole compromise of, well, do I go for a big servo on my little model which will perform better, or because before, it's not that long ago that the small tail servos were a bit rubbish, and they probably still are. But now you can have a small servo, a large servo performance on a small servo tail servo. And and then you've got something new in the works, I believe.
Yeah, I'm working on something for people.
Would this be it by any chance?
It's out there. That is going to be a brushless tail servo. Obviously intended for 700 class machines. It's not going to be as well priced as the mid-size, the tail servo you just saw before on range, because again, this is brushless and we got a lot more expensive stuff into the servo. This is not the value. Still going to be competitively priced. Don't get me wrong; it won't be extremely expensive, but it won't be as inexpensive as the servos that we have right now. So
you don't get high end specs and bits and pieces for low end money. Or mid-range, do you? Right. Unfortunately, we've not only have we run out of time, we've gone over time as well. I'm going to have to wind it up here. We're supposed to keep it nice and short and sweet, but it's one of those subjects that's actually very difficult to keep short and sweet because it is such a big, complex thing. So, everybody, go and buy some nice servos. It will make your model fly better, a lot better.
Do you have one more minute, Adrian? There's a question.
I can spare a minute. 1
minute. There's a question I saw, and I wanted to to talk about this very, very quickly. The guy here, so apologize for probably mispronouncing the name. This is Andreas Mastrakis. I've noticed that both RJX and BK servos have an issue on initialization, especially if I'm using a BEC. Why is this happening? Is there issues? It's not only BK and RJX. There's two other brands. Again, I'm not mentioning brands that have this issue. This issue has to do with the fact that the servo is using a true high voltage chip. If what I've noticed that is happening, especially on my servos, if you use a BEC, most BECs these days are switching BECs. If you use a BEC that starts at a low voltage and it takes too long to ramp up, the servo itself will see that as a low voltage and will just not initialize. The servo wants to see a minimum of 6 volts to initialize. So if it takes too long for the BEC to ramp up the voltage, the servo will not initialize. And basically, if you plug and unplug, plug and unplug, eventually it'll initialize. Once it initializes, it works. I understand that this is really annoying. I've been talking to a lot of people to try to correct this issue, but it's really not an issue to correct. It has more to do with, again, the fact that this is a true HV board, and we can lower the safe value of that voltage, but then it would create danger down the road if you have some kind of voltage drop or some brownout on your BEC. I noticed that with a good BEC, again, Western Robotics, it doesn't happen. With a 2-cell LiPo battery, power buffers, or one of the Scorpion backup cards, doesn't happen. If the voltage is constant, doesn't happen. It happens during boot up when the BEC is too slow to ramp up to the correct voltage. So that's the answer to the question.
And I'm really sorry we haven't had enough time to run through all these questions. I think at some point we might have to get you back on the main show to just to talk about servos, because it's just such a massive subject. We could be all evening.
Our servos have an influence, and there's a lot of questions. It's crazy. But I agree with you. Anytime.
Yeah. Cool. Right. Okay, but everybody, thank you very much for tuning in. There's Heli Masters next weekend. I believe there'll be a live stream. Nick will be there commentating. And I will be there. And you'll be there as well. Take some pictures and send us some pictures, because unfortunately myself and Kev aren't going, but we can't. It's just too much money for me to go, unfortunately. We've got Matt Botus on the next show. That's going to be a good one. We're talking all about synergy. Oh, and there was one other question that I need to ask Bert, which I've just remembered because I've just looked at the wireframe. That little picture that was posted by SAB the other day of what looked like a main shaft and some little grips. What was it?
Oh my God, that is something new is coming soon.
Oh, come on!
Everybody gets really upset because I put these teasers. I actually get in trouble for doing it. The design is not final yet. The design is. All I can say is before the end of the year there will be a freaking badass machine coming out to the market from SAB. So if you're looking for, don't spend your money. Buy the big ones, but don't buy another small helicopter of a different brand, because this will be the right one to buy.
I think that's pretty much said enough for people. I think
that was a great sales pitch, by the way. That's so not like me.
And also, lastly, we have Air in halfway through July. That'll be worth going to. That's in the this end of the country, down in England. Down at a place called Warminster. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's a lovely, lovely countryside out there. bring a glider with you just in case it's a bit windy. There's lots of lovely slope sawing bits out there. Right, thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming on the show, Bert. It's been a pleasure as always, and we'll talk to you soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Good night, everybody.